just testing the audio, and then we'll get this show on the road. Cool. Alright, so I was fiddling around on this track and I ended up making a bass that I'm pretty happy with, to be honest. It sounds like this. Yeah, it's pretty cool, I think, especially when it's in context. But if I could, I would like to kind of make it a little bit more more flexible, because there's a lot of different racks to use just to get this tone. So that's what we'll be doing today. So just while I get ready, I will play the track that I've got so far. Cool. So let's get started on making that. Oh God, I've just opened Bing on my phone by mistake. That's a absolute nightmare. Oh, fuck's sake. Yeah, that should be a bit better. Okay. So, if you listen to this bass, there's a lot going on. I have a version set up here. I was running it through an actual synthesizer, but to give you an idea of the kind of modulation we're looking at, we've got filter movement, morph. So if I make a lane for each one, it'll be like quite ridiculous just to see how much movement is happening all at the same time. But just for the hell of it, I thought, why not? See, that's just 4 lines of movement, and I think there's 14 macros that I'm working with, so it's a bit on the hectic side. Anyway, we're going to build possibly in a 2-parter or something, but I'm going to work on making a similar sound that maybe is a little bit more restrained or something, I don't know. So what I'm doing is I'm going to make a really basic Reese bass. Super simple. Square wave on one oscillator, get another oscillator, set it to square wave, detune them a little bit, so maybe make one positive 3 cents, one negative 3 cents, and then introduce the sub with tone up on full. Actually, a bit loud on my headphones, just hold up. Yeah, cool. Now, with a lot of these Reese basses, the source material that you're using is usually kind of spread with like detuning or some sort of stereo effect. So a really good way to do that is in Ableton, just set up classic, boom. Pretty cool bass. And if we were to just use that here, drop down 2 octaves. Yeah, that's what we're working with. I'm also setting the pitch bend range to 12 semitones because that will give us like a lot more movement when we actually want to take it there. All right, so what did I just open? Oh God. Cool. Okay, so the next step is the filtration or filtering. Filtration doesn't sound like the right word, but the core of this sort of sound like the core of that is just a lot of filters moving around and then we're distorting it. So we're going to start with that. Add an auto filter. Now, of course, you could do this within the actual instrument rack as well, but I prefer to have like a separate, just like a rack that I can drop on any sound, and then it's a lot easier to use. So the idea is we're going to be morphing filters. So with a filter, you have these different types. You've got low pass, which sweeps from down to up. And it cuts out the high frequencies when you set it low. You have a high pass, which does the opposite. You have a band pass, which only allows frequencies around its range. And there's also a notch, which just removes like a certain chunk. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to use the morph function, and that's how we're going to get a lot of our character, by morphing it between a low pass, a band pass, and a high pass filter. At least that's for the first filter anyway. So we're going to put the auto filter in a group. We are then going to drop an LFO directly onto it. Or should we? Let's forget the LFO for now. Okay, so let's map the frequency to macro 1, the morph to macro 2, and that's it. However, we want to control these mappings because otherwise it's kind of hard to work with if we're morphing the whole way. I like to have a lot more control. So I open up mapping and we're going to change the maximum so it's 0 high pass. I think should be the right number. Yeah, let's test it. Yeah. So now we've basically set it so it only goes from a low pass filter to a band pass to a high pass. And just to kind of demonstrate, I just want to show just how much you can get just from modulating that single parameter. It's quite impressive. So one thing I like to do is use the morph from a high pass to a band pass to add a bit of punch. And we can also kind of flip it around and get almost like a shaker sort of feel. Adds a nice transient. And then if we modulate the frequency, and I'm just doing this at random at this point because it doesn't really matter. And maybe sweep it up. And if we set it to 12 dB, we're going to allow, it's a much steeper ladder, so we'll allow a lot more like room in how it works. Cool. But depending on your taste, a 24 dB can be good as well. And playing with the resonance. I found having the resonance at like 35 on a 12 pole filter can be a good thing as well, because it kind of gives you that, the big difference between the pole filters is how they emphasize the certain frequencies and the edges, right? And if you increase the resonance on a bandpass especially, it really enhances the kind of acidic sort of tone that it has. So let's have a listen to 12 dB, 35%. And then if we compare that to 0% resonance, 24 dB. See, they're a bit different, but we'll just go with, I don't know, 20% resonance on 12 dB to start off with. And I'm going to put in a few more modulations. Just so that as the track becomes more complicated, we don't kind of lose it. Here, maybe I'll put in a low pass filter. Hell, we can even go from low pass all the way to high pass with some cool movement. So a nice kind of sucking effect there. Yeah, so you can see that we're already kind of getting like a decent amount of movement from pretty minimal effort. And so the idea is that we're going to have multiple instances of these filters all operating in different ways to give a interesting total sort of characteristic to it. So we'll call that filter 1. And while I'm here, we're going to set it up so the gain changes depending on whether it's set to a 12 dB or 24 dB. So we're adding 2 more macros. We can put the resonance on macro 3 and make it a maximum of 100% because 125% is crazy. And bring it back to 20. And we are also going to map the slope to macro 4. And there's 2 ways to do it. We could just have it how it's automatically set. So once it hits 65, it clicks over to the 24 pole. But I think it's better if you just go into mapping, you find the slope, drag it down from 1 to 127, which means that when it's not on at all, when it's set to 0, nothing will happen and it's at 12 dB. But the moment you move that knob the tiniest bit, it just clicks on straight away. Makes life easier. And now we're going to map the utility to the slope as well. Going to mapping and we're doing the same thing. 1 to 127. And we're going to invert both of them. So it starts off at a low pole, then becomes a high pole. So when it's at a low pole, the 24 dB pole, we want to give it some more gain because the filter's so sharp that we lose quite a little bit in there. So the easiest way to do that is to just have this utility, set it to 6 dB, and it should be pretty similar. Let's have a listen. Let's bring it back a little bit. Let's make it 4.5 dB. And if we listen really carefully, we can hear the difference in tone. So this is the 12 dB, and so this is the 24 dB, and focus on how it's there's a lot less fuzz on the edges. It's a very defined sort of sound. Compared to, particularly noticeable on the last note there when it morphs from a low pass to a high pass. Yeah, I think it's actually quite a distinct tone difference there. Okay, moving on. So that's filter 1, and we can just close that group up. And I don't know, let's color them all green. Why not? So filter 1 can be green. Cool. The next part of the filtering process, Actually, I'm going to be right back because the heater's on and I'm starting to get really hot. So I won't be a moment. I'll leave the music looping. And I'll run an ad for anyone who can tolerate that. Cool. All right, back to where we were. So just for visual aid, I'm going to keep the frequency lane and the morph lane open. So when it becomes more complicated, we can still kind of have an idea of what's happening and why it's happening. I think it's kind of important when you're doing sound design to know why you're doing certain things. So we're going to stick with the 12 dB because I think that for the bass that we're going for, we're going to kind of want a little bit of extra edge to it, if you know what I mean. Okay, so the second filter, which we're going to call filter 2. So let's remember to name everything as we go. Because it makes things so much easier once the rack becomes complicated, and this one's going to get really complicated, I can assure you. So name the new filter 2. Now we are going to group it and basically do the same thing, but the difference is this time we are going to be using a notch as the center. So we're going to move from high pass to notch, low pass to notch, and then to high pass. Okay, so again, map macro 1 to the frequency, map macro 2 to the morph, open up mapping, and now we're going to bring the minimum range. We want it to be, I think, bang on HP, so 0 HP is what we want for that. So now when we move it, we've got a much more fine control, because it's just messy when then you've got like 10 filters all going off at the same time. Cool. And again, we get the choice of whether we want it to be a 12 dB, no resonance, 24 dB with no resonance, or we can use resonance. And what I find interesting about using resonance on notch filtering is that you still end up cutting out roughly the same amount. It just kind of sharpens the edges. So in this instance, we want to cut a fair bit because this is a major filter. It's not one of the minor filters that we'll be using. So I'm thinking 24 at about 20%. Let's just open up another notch and we'll open up an EQ8 so we can see what's happening there as well. So if there's no other filters going on, this is what our square wave looks like. And sorry, I'll turn off the unison mode. Now, when the notch is all the way at basically 20k, it has no effect on the sound. So if I turn it on, off, it's only up at the very, very top end, which is not really that audible. However, when we sweep it down, if we set it to 24, it becomes much more obvious. So it's pretty much completely removing the frequencies at around 520 or so. There's none getting through. We set it to 12. They're getting through. They're just massively reducing the gain. If we change the resonance, let's put it up to say fairly extreme, what about 25% resonance? It doesn't make a huge, it's starting to really mitigate the effect of the notching. Even at 24. So, that's why I'm going to use, even 10% resonance might be a better option. Yeah, we'll stick with 10% resonance on a 24 dB filter, which gives us this. It's a pretty violent filtering. Cool, okay. And yeah, I find it helpful to have an EQ8 up, especially when we're dealing with this stuff. Because it's good to see the filters, Do we really need just for the sake of clarity, we'll set the resonance and the pole filter as well. And likewise, I'm going to go into mapping, make the resonance maximum 100%, and set the slope from 1 to 127. And invert, cool. Yeah, so it starts off at 12. And there's not a huge difference in the gain happening there, but for the sake of clarity, I'm going to do a similar thing. I'm going to map the utility on to the slope, going to mapping, set it from 1 to 127. And we'll give it like a tiny bit of gain, like 1.5 dB is probably enough. Actually, let's make it 3. Sounds like it needs a little bit more. This is not a tutorial. It's like step by step where I tell you exactly what to do. I'm building my own sound design tools here. It's a very iterative sort of process, so we get what we get. Cool. So we're going to stick with a slope of 24. Now there's 2 ways to go about, I will show you the different options for how I deal with morphing, because it's nice to know. So let's say we've got a morph filter and we want it to go, we want the frequency mapped, boom. And we won't worry about the resonance. We also want to map the morphing so we can change it from, I don't know, a low pass to get all that cool funky movement. One method I like to use is to use an LFO that's essentially turned off. and I map the LFO to the morph, which is actually kind of cool just for getting sounds. But if we turn the depth off, it's not going to be doing anything, right? And then we can control the offset as a really clear sort of positioning system, so we can see exactly what we're doing. And the best way to do that is to set the mapping from 0 to 50%. So now you know that 0% is a bandpass filter, negative 100% is low pass filter, and positive 100% is a high pass filter, and that's always going to be the case. Yeah, you know what? Actually, I'm going to use that because it's something I've been doing for a while and it'll make life a lot easier. So, going to unmap the morph from filter 1, drop an LFO, I don't know, I guess after the filter, doesn't really matter. Turn the depth to 0, rate to like 0 as well, it doesn't matter. Set the maximum to 50%, map it to morph, done. Cool. And that's all you need to do for that, and then just map the offset to macro 2. And if we re-enable the automation, it's still there. Yeah, that's actually probably a better idea because it makes things a lot easier to understand. But rename it to morph. Call the resonance Q because that's what fancy people do. And the last one is slope. 12/24 dB. Cool. And you know what? I cannot stand that green. It's revolting. Let's make it kind of reddish colors. That's cool enough by me. And see, if it was just set to like a band pass, we wouldn't get that nice kind of transient. And you get that through controlling the morphing. Okay, name the LFO, morph, control. All right, and we're going to do the same thing for the filter 2 that we made. So unmap the morph, drop LFO afterwards, set it to 0, depth to 0, mapping in this instance will be from 100% to 50%. So that way, it's going to be going from a low pass to a high pass in a really smooth way. And we can map that to macro 2, call it morph. And actually, while we're renaming things, make it short. Morph. Cool. Filter 1 freak. Filter 2 freak. Filter 2 morph. Great. And we can color these in. How about we go for, I don't know, what's that color like? That's gross. About the pink, kind of gross. Yeah, I like that blue. That's a nice color. And green for the unnecessary controls. And that's going to be universal. Going to be using that green color for controls that we're not actually going to be using directly in the rack. That should make things a little bit easier to understand. Q and macro 4 is slope 12/24 dB. Slope 12/24 D capital B. Might as well make it look fancy. Okay, and we can close those up. gain stage, because that's what it is. So we can close those two up, because when we open up these filters, all I want to see is the filter movement itself. I don't really care about the other stuff. Okay, so let's add some more movement by using the notching control. And the notching control is actually like super important in getting the really cool tone that we're kind of going to want to get. So if you just randomly or kind of semi-randomly move the frequency of the notch around, you get this really cool phasing effect. That's cool. It's like a boomerang sort of sound. It's like da ya da. It's almost got some rhythm there. But yes, I'm just going to draw some shapes in. It doesn't really matter at this stage of the game because, you know, it's just a little rack that we're using to test. But it's helpful to hear the effects that we're making. So let's loop that. And so now we're just hearing the filter of the notch filter's frequency move around. Now, you'll also notice that we're losing a lot of the bass, especially when it gets like this note here. That's not a big deal because we'll bring the bass back in when we do the band splitting. Let's now test out really using that morphing control on the notch. And it's not something I do all the time, but it can be effective. It adds a bit of class to it, I reckon, especially when you see the two working together. Have that one go down. So they're both going down there into low passes. So what happens if we invert that? They disappear because you get this cool effect where essentially you're making the notch even bigger. Which is cool, I think. And we can give some more movement there. And I think if we added some drums to that, it'd probably sound pretty cool. I just love looking at how the filters move, especially in conjunction with just looking at the frequency response as well. I think that can be really fun. Yeah, cool. All right. Finally rename that filter 2 and we can move on to the next step. So we've got 2 more filters to make, possibly more, and these next 2 filters I think are where it becomes a little bit more interesting, and we can turn off those 2 for the time being. So when I first started making these sorts of basses, like the first step, like with everyone, was just playing with band passes. And that's when I started adding in the morph controls. Because I noticed that by allowing that little bit of high end at the start, you're getting a lot more edge. So after I got to that point, that's when I started really experimenting with the morphing controls, you know. And one of the first things I did was just drop an LFO and modulate the morph. In this instance, we'll go up to 50%. And really cool stuff just by playing with the rate. You know, that's pretty cool, I think. And I also noticed that when you set the frequency quite low, you're essentially making like an LFO that, instead of making a tremolo effect where you're just deleting chunks of the sound, you're moving it from bass to high end, which is pretty cool. And the whole time you're still allowing that sub to come through. Especially if you set it like 70 or so, or whatever the frequency of the note that you're dealing with is. Yeah, so that was the point I got to, and then I started kind of taking things a little bit further. And what I discovered was that notching really changes the sound of things. And there's different ways you can go about notching. For instance, a really cool one that I like is to just set it to random, give it some smoothness, and then map that to the frequency. That's pretty cool, I think. But there are better things you can do. What we can do, that's annoying. If we set the filter again to a morph, pretty much every filter I use these days is a morph because they're really, really powerful. But if we set it to a morph and then modulate the morph with an LFO and really tightly control how far we're morphing, we get a really cool effect. Have a listen. In a way, it's the opposite of what I was doing with the bandpass filter. And that's cool. And if you just play with the frequencies, you get this really nice interaction where even though the frequencies are like sweeping up and down, different parts of the bass response and the high end are responding as well, which is really cool. So let's have a listen now. However, there's an issue here, and the issue is that we're taking out way too much of the bass and the high end when we do that. So if we set the depth to 25%, or maybe even, let's go 50, make it a bit brutal. You get a pretty cool effect going on. So that's what we're going to be looking at now. So we'll put that into a group. Again, call the LFO morph control, and the filter this time around will be called notch 1 because this filter is, we're not going to be manually controlling the morphing capabilities. It's just straight up going to be run by an LFO doing its own thing. Okay, open up mapping, and likewise macro 1 will go to the filter frequency, and that will be controlling basically the tone of the whole thing. Let's make it a bit more extreme. And the other parameter that we really want to work with here is the rate, because it sounds very different depending on what kind of rate you've got. If we set the rate to, like, I don't know, let's sweep it up. Let's make it go from 1 to 6, say. See, it's giving us quite a different tone there. So we're going to map the rate to macro 2 and the depth to macro 3, and let's face it, we need a final macro. The resonance can be the last one. So we'll have frequency, resonance, rate, and depth for our little 4 macro setup that we've got going on here. And let's play with them a bit as well. Let's change the depth for, I don't know, the middle one here. Get bigger, same with the last one here, it can get bigger. And at those points, let's change the rate as well. Yeah, see, it's cool. And if you start fiddling with the resonance as well, that's when you get into weird territory. Because we're bringing out actual resonances there, which I think is pretty cool. And let's have a listen. Yeah, so you get the idea, okay? Notch 1, cool. And in this instance, we don't really have to worry about changing the gain when we do different filter slopes, because I'm not doing filter slopes. Now I'm going to make a second instance of that same filter, and it's not as kooky as it sounds, because once you start dealing with multiple notches, that's when the really cool interactions happen. And in particular, I will demonstrate something especially cool about this particular method of notching. So then gain, set the LFO to 50%. Yeah, we don't need to invert it. And then we go rate and depth control again. Now, likewise, we want the depth at 50%. And this time we are not going to modulate the resonance. We're just going to leave the resonances at 25, because these notches aren't the really big ones. So watch what happens. What I'll do is I'll duplicate that so we can A/B it. Watch what happens once we start playing with the frequency of the second notch. Down, up, up, down, up, and up, like that. And I'm going to turn the depth to 0% to demonstrate my point. So let's have a listen. So the yellow one is just 1 notch operating. The pink one is 2 notches. Oh, I made a mistake there. I didn't map it to anything, that's why. Yeah, cool. All right. So let's listen now. And why is that blocked for me? Auto filter morph. Oh yeah, because we don't need it. So yeah. So yellow is with 1 notch, pink is with 2. it's especially prevalent if you can actually see the way the notches are working as well. See, this note here is a lot less complicated than this note. And we can take it even further. We can like give it a double wobble. Because essentially what we're doing is we're cutting out more of the sound each time. And for some reason I ended up kind of drawing the same shapes somehow. However, where it gets really cool is where you start adding depth to the second notch, because now they might be going out of sync, or one might be higher than the other. So it's just set the frequency to 1000 for one notch and 1000 for the second notch. See, they're out of sync because, I mean, I guess it's because they're both kind of, so when it says 1 hertz as a rate, I mean, that's pretty broad. Depends on when the rate starts, will be how the sync works. And if we change the rate on one of them, you get these cool interactions. And also, if you change their positions relative to each other, you can end up boosting certain parts. So here we're boosting hits. Reinvert it. So this one is boosting the bass at the same time. Yeah, you get the idea anyway. It's by having these cool interactions where the LFO controlling the morph changes how they pulse. It just adds more texture to the tone. For the time being, I'm going to have it at 25%. And let's go through the renaming process again. So notch 1 freak, notch 1 Q, notch 1 rate, notch 1 depth, notch 2 freak, notch 2 Q, notch 2 rate, and notch 2 depth. Oh damn it, I didn't put a dot after that. That's annoying. I'm kind of a little bit OCD on these things. Let's give them some colors as well. How about lavender? Why not? Lavender's a nice color, I guess. And this one, like one lavender, one this kind of bluey sort of color. Yeah, that works. Okay, cool. And likewise, we will rename everything. So that's called notch 2. That one is called morph control. And the entire rack is called notch 2. And let's just hear the difference if we turn off the depths completely. It's subtle, but it's there, I think. Okay, cool. So we can close those groups up, and those 4 filters are really going to be the core of the sound that we're going to be dealing with. So we then have to think about the order of these filters, because every time you filter something out, you're going to be reducing the gain, sometimes quite violently. So for instance, if they're all turned off, and we can go here and look at the volume, like, well, negative 3.5 dB or so. But once I start adding in extra things, I'll choose a better point on the, how about there? Yeah. Now a negative 12. So by the time we've added everything in, we've lost like 8 or 9 dB, which in terms of the actual volume is a very large amount of volume. And that's with the notches at a high position. If we bring the notches down into the mid-range, see, we're looking at, God, that's almost like 15 dB a range. And that's important. Now, the other thing is that we have to think about the order in which that we want to have our filters. When I first started doing this, it used to just be one filter. That would be the morphing bandpass. And then when I added in the second filter, the notching one, I started to think which order is the most efficient order for doing that. Because like, if you think about it, if you put the band passing filter before the notch, a lot of the time the notch actually isn't cutting anything out. But if you put the notch beforehand, the filter is removing stuff that you're not going to notice anyway. So I ended up kind of doubling it up, which gave a really clean sound. So this, I'll just demonstrate if you have a filter at each end. So this is just with one filter. Start from the start. And now with two. It's really noticeable on that last note. And what happens if we have the filter at the end? It's actually almost like having the slope change. So let's compare. Let's say this is two filters, and this is one filter with a 24 dB slope. Now, just for the purposes of seeing these differences, I'm going to just resample that down. 1 bar should do. And that was with one filter. And how do I close that EQ? Filter at the end. Cool. Let's do filter at the start now. Filter at the start. And the final one will be both filters. And we can look at the waveform and see the difference. Two filters. Okay, so let's compare them. So add two audio tracks. Yeah, sick. Right. Let's have a look at the differences. There's not a great deal of difference between the filter at the start versus filter at the end. The one at the start seems to lose a little bit more volume, particularly at this last chunk. But there doesn't seem to be much difference beyond that. But there's a huge difference when you've got two filters. Oh yeah, finally, we will record an instance at 24 dB slope. We'll just go filter at the end. Yeah, cool. Yeah, so we've got a fair bit of difference here, and I'm honestly not sure which option is the best. Like, there's a cleanness to the two filter option. Yeah, I don't know. I can always change it later on anyway. So, yeah. And then you've also got the concern of where to place the notches. Now, I think the best option is to have... Yeah, shit. It's kind of hard to determine, because later on down the track, one of the real considerations is whether do you want to have distortion before or after your notches, because you're going to get different harmonics depending on that. But I think for this unit, we'll start off, we'll have filter 2 at the very start, a dead version of filter 1 that we can turn on and off at will, then the 2 notches, then filter 1 turned on. Let's have a listen. And what's the slope at? Compare that. Yeah, it's tricky. Yeah, what we'll do, we'll have 2 filters, one at the start, one at the end, both at 12 dB, and the first one will have no resonance. But that still does leave us with the volume problem. So, later on, we will be adding some distortion, which will be changing the gain. But at this stage, I'm going to boost the gain a little bit after each notch. So, let's go 6 dB, 2 instances. Two instances at 3 dB is probably a better option. What's happening there? Cool, okay, and let's look at the EQ just to see what kind of movement is happening. Great. So that's the first part of the rack. So to make things a little bit simpler, we're now going to put that all in a giant group. So first we're going to name gain boost, gain and boost. Yeah, okay. So we're going to put them all in a giant group. Like you could regard it as a super group. And now we're going to start mapping these ones. So we'll just go in order. So filter 1. Hang on. Ah, damn it. We're going to lose all the macro mapping if we do that. That's a bit annoying. All right. Yeah, maybe if I duplicate it, that'll make it easier. When it finally does. So let's start mapping. Filter 1 goes to macro 1. Filter 1 morph goes to macro 2. Now we can close that one up. Filter 2, frequency can go to macro 3. Morph can go to macro 4. Now that's closed up. Then notch macro, the frequency can go to 1. Notch 2, the frequency go to 6. And filter 1 will likewise be mapped to 1 and 2. So now it should all be macroed over now. So we have 6 knobs, which is pretty good considering that we started with like 10. I'm just going to copy some of the automation lane controls. So frequency there, paste. Cool. Frequency is here. Close that up as well. I don't know what that ding was. I heard a ding on my headphones. It was a bit silly. Okay. So it's pasted over. This will unfortunately take a little while. So filter 2. I'll speed it up if I go bars like that. So copy that information. Then filter 2, that's frequency. Paste it. Filter 2 morph, which I think is the really cool part. Paste that over as well. I mean, I could just be drawing it in again, but I'd rather do it the proper way. And what else is there? There's the notch information. So notch 1, copy that. And the thing to remember about a lot of these kind of tones, especially the notch 1 and 2, like the less important notching, is that you can actually get really cool results if you just randomize the process. I like to have a lot of fine control over these things, which is why I'm not randomizing it, but I could like get out of draw mode. Just to demonstrate, if I duplicate that one again, once it's done, okay, and delete the automation for all the notching, you can get really cool results. So firstly, that'll sound like this because there's no notches happening. So the only filter working there is the filter 1. So what we can do is drop in LFO, or you could use Shaper or Envelope Follower or a million other things. duplicate it twice. Set them all to random with full smoothness, or not full smoothness, it's totally optional. And change the rates of them a little bit, because we just want them to be totally out of sync with one another. And let's just map the notch controls. It'll sound cool, have a listen. Speed them up. That's creating a very subby sort of response, which is pretty cool, I think. We can delete them, and we can even take it further. So let's forget about notch 1 and notch 2. Let's just deal with the filter 1. If we put in a drum kit, I don't know, what about one of those glitchy ones? Yeah, that's cool. Token kit. This is like a fun trick, let me tell you. So let's just make a loop. Boom boom cha cha cha. Let's double the speed. That'll do, something like that. And then we get an envelope follower, drop the envelope follower after the drums, and give it a bit more gain. Yeah, that's good. Now we go mapping, and map that to the frequency. It'll sound really cool. Check it out. Don't know what that was. I just got some random notification. Let's change it up a bit as well. Let's and we can take it even further. Let's add like I don't know, another drum kit. The beta fish kit. I love some of the names for this stuff, man. It's cool. What about this one? Yeah, I'm just kind of making something random just to kind of see what results we get. Yeah, it'll do. Cool. So we're going to do the same thing. Give it a bit more gain. Try 6 dB. That actually might have a pretty cool effect because of the way the transients work. But let's just map that to the filter frequency. Let's have a listen. And I don't know, give this one something weird. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's just from like using envelope followers. It's really cool the different effects you can get from all this stuff. I love it. That's why music production is the best thing in the world. But anyway, we're working with this at the moment. And we can forget about these ones here. I'm going to delete that. Now, before I go, because this is definitely going to be like a 2-part stream, because there's no way in hell I'm getting through the next chunk that easily. But before we go, I just want to deal with 2 concepts. And before we go anywhere, I call this primary filter unit. That'll do. 6. Cool, yeah. So before I go, I want to talk about band splitting, because there's different ways to do it. And it will play quite an important role in the next step. Now, the 2 different ways to do it, and it's actually, let's go the 3 ways. Why the fuck not? Oh, sorry for the swearing. But the first way that I learned, and I think I was encouraged to do it just because it was a very easy method of getting somewhere with this effect, is you just use the band splitting on multiband dynamics. Check it. You got the lows, got the mids, you got the highs. So if you make a group, duplicate twice, call that one high, mid, and low. All you have to do is solo the respective one. So now we've split it. And you might want to change where the crossover point is. I often like to have a pretty big gap. So let's make it say 240 crossover for the low to the mid, 240 here as well. And there you've got a really simple band splitting method. I'm not sure if it's the most... don't know if it's the most CPU efficient way of doing it, but it's a rudimentary way of getting that sort of effect. Another way to do it is to use EQ8. And if we wanted to make 3 bands, we would have a low pass filter that it's at like 240. Call that low. You then duplicate twice again and change that one to high and that one to mid. And what we would do is for the mids, we'll change that filter type from a low pass filter to a high pass filter. Back off the Q a little bit. And also we should probably be using the ×4 slope to make the distinctions really clear. What sort of Q do we want? 0.7. Yeah, because we want to kind of define the exact crossover points. Let's have a listen. So there's the low and the mid band, and well, in that case, we've got a low band and a high band, basically. Now, to get a proper high split, we add in another high pass filter. Again, set the Q to 0.7, because that way there's no like unnecessary resonance points, because you don't want unnecessary resonance points when you're dealing with like fairly clean separation and stuff like that. But now we decide, where do we want our high pass to be? Sometimes people like it very high. I think about 2,500 hertz is a pretty good number. And so now we've got a high, a low, but look, we've still got too much high in the mids. So we're going to add a second filter, and this filter we're going to set to 2,500 hertz. And we switch it on. So now we've got a mid-range. And let's add in another EQ8 so we can just see what's going on. Is it coloring the sound at all? Yeah, I don't think it's coloring the sound in the slightest. Cool. Yeah. So that's another method of getting a band split. But I think the easiest way to do it, I mean, for these purposes anyway, is to just use auto filter and just have a single filter doing everything. So if we wanted a 3-band, which is a little bit more tedious when using auto filter, but let's go low, mid, high. So if we're using auto filter, it's the same idea. We have the low band is a low pass filter, make it 240. Mid band will be a high pass filter at 240, followed by a low pass filter after the high pass filter, and we can make the high pass so the low pass at 2,500 hertz. Again, the resonance issue is kind of a tricky one. Maybe like 20% should be good, because it's not like a completely flat sort of thing. I don't even think that's an option on Ableton to have the dead flat ones. Make that just whatever you do when you're band splitting, be consistent about it. And for the high pass, we set it to 2,500, which is the same crossover point. It's basically aligning the points, essentially. So we get low, mid, high. Now that should sound the same as what we have here. See, there's a difference in how the filter works. Let's try the mids. Yeah, and the reason we're getting that difference is there's a 4-pole filter on the EQ8 option, whereas we're using a 2-pole filter, I think, on the auto filter version. Let's try the high band. Oh, that's interesting. Theoretically, if we were to do it like that, it's letting in a bit of a gap. Let's check it. Yeah, it's letting in a little bit there. That's interesting. Anyway, that's just 3 different ways to get a band split set up. In our instance, we don't want 3 bands, we want 2. So we're going to have a high pass filter on the mid, and let's make it look nicer as well. Low and mid. Delete the high. Cool. So there's your band split. There's some cool stuff you can do with a low pass filter that I don't really hear that many people talk about. So let's set it to 400 because we're going to use a filter before it as well. And this will also be a low pass filter, but we're going to do different things with this one. We're going to be playing with the resonance, and we're going to be playing with the frequency in a really interesting way. So going to mapping, set the resonance at a maximum of 100 and set the maximum frequency. I'll just really quickly check. That's what the ding was. I got an email about some crap. Yeah, it's really useful to have a frequency of notes chart. Like, I'm pretty sure EQ8 naturally does that. See, it says like 21 hertz is F-1, B is 61, C, yeah. Anyway, it's good to know the numbers of the actual specific note to frequency numbers, because that's what we're going to use. So let's just try and find A2, get a maximum range of, where's C4? Let's try and find C4. C4 is just a little bit beyond 500. So let's give this one a maximum range of 500. So now when we're controlling this, it'll be a lot easier to do. So what's happening here? Okay, chain notch to frequency. Why are those dead ones there? That's really strange. I don't get that. Oh well. Oh, it's probably because they've already been removed the lanes. They're not being used anymore. So what we're going to do is we're going to play with the subs. So what note's that? That's a B0. So what is the frequency of B0? I'm pretty sure it's like 61. Yeah, 61 to 63. All right, so, oh God, what have I done? I'm going to zoom in and we're going to start playing with the frequency. So we want this one to be at 61. Well, let's make it 63 just to be on the safe side. So that's just allowing the sub in now. Well, it's like a flubby sub going on there. So what are the notes? The notes are B, B, A, B, D. So that's how we're going to do it. I think you double it, so like 128 will be the first harmonic. And A, where's A? 54. So what we're going to be doing is boosting certain subs to make them really, really punch. And we're going to do that D1 is 70. $75 through to 70. So what have we got there? 72. Okay, and D1 is 140 something. Cool. Great. Now we're going to start playing with the resonance. That's cool. Bring it down there. Control the resonance again. I don't know, 40. We can even distort it. And so what we're essentially doing is like brutally boosting specific frequencies in a really, I think it's a tasteful way of doing it. So just to make it clear, this is without any modulation. This is with modulation. And if we were to just have that pretty low, like 120, it's just cool, I think, to have more control of the subs. There's too much distortion happening there. And we can even control how much of a peak we get. So we can control the punch as well. yeah, God, it feels like really tasty to my ears. And if we were to tie that in with distortion, that's when you start to get some pretty cool effects. So now that resonance is controlling the clipping. And so instead of nasty digital clipping, we get this cool sound that it's almost like your car speakers are broken. So by controlling the resonance and how it runs into the distortion, you can get some cool effects. Yeah, I think it's cool. Anyway, that's going to be it for me for a little while. I'll probably be back on a bit later to continue with this rack. I hope it's been helpful to some people. Yeah, have a good one.